What you are about to hear is not a movie. It is not a drama series. It is not something someone made up for views. This is a true account of what happened when a pregnant woman, 7 months along, alone, and thousands of miles from home, was physically dragged through the marble lobby of one of Seoul's most expensive hotels by the man who had promised to protect her. In front of guests. In front of cameras. In front of his own mother, who stood and watched with a calm smile like she had planned it. Most people in that lobby looked away. The staff froze. No one moved, and then one man did. He did not shout. He did not make a scene. He simply placed his hand around the aggressor's wrist and said 4 words that stopped everything and changed everything that came after. By the time this story ends, a corporate empire will have been brought to its knees. A secret buried for 30 years will have surfaced. A baby will have been born in the middle of a war her mother did not start but absolutely finished. And a woman who arrived in Seoul with $400 and a canceled insurance card will have left as someone that an entire city could not ignore. Stay with me until the very last word. Because every single part of this story matters. The beginning will shock you. The middle will make you angry. And the ending, I promise you, will make every minute worth it. Round pushpin. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? I read every single comment, and I genuinely love knowing who is on this journey with me. And if you are new here, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You do not want to miss what comes next in this story or the ones after it. Now let's go. I never thought the worst moment of my life would happen in a lobby that cost more per night than my monthly rent back home in Houston. The marble floors of the Grand Sora Hotel in Seoul reflected the chandelier light like a mirror. Everything in that building was designed to make you feel small if you did not belong there. And that morning, David Shin made sure I felt exactly that. His hand was wrapped around my wrist like a handcuff. Not gentle. Not nervous. Purposeful. He was dragging me, 7 months pregnant, carry-on bag spilled across the floor, my vitamin bottles rolling under a luggage cart, toward the revolving doors like I was something embarrassing he needed to remove before anyone important saw it. You were not supposed to come here, Maya. His voice was low, controlled, and cold. This is humiliating. I had not slept in 20 hours. I had flown from Houston to Seoul in economy class because I could not afford business. My back ached. My ankles were swollen inside my sneakers. And the reason I came, the only reason I dragged my pregnant body across the world, was because 3 days ago, my prenatal insurance had been canceled without warning. The same insurance David had promised, in writing, to maintain until our daughter was born. I came for an answer. I came because my doctor said missing another appointment could put the baby at serious risk. I came because I had nowhere else to turn. Instead, I got this. The hotel guests stared. Some looked away. The staff stood frozen, eyes low, pretending not to see. David's mother, Mrs. Clara Shin, stood 10 feet behind us in a cream blazer and perfect posture, watching with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had planned for exactly this outcome. David, let go of my arm, I said. My voice was shaking, but I held his eyes. You're hurting me. He did not let go. He tightened his grip and pulled harder, and then everything stopped. A hand came from nowhere, large, calm, and impossibly firm, and closed around David's wrist like a steel trap. David froze. His whole body went rigid. The man attached to that hand did not raise his voice. He did not shout or make a scene. He simply said, in flawless English, with a stillness that was more frightening than any anger I had ever heard, let her go. David turned, and I watched the color drain completely from his face. I did not know who the man was. Not yet. But David did. That much was clear from the way his body changed the second he turned around. The arrogance evaporated. His jaw went tight. His eyes dropped for just a fraction of a second, the way a person's eyes drop when they are trying to remember whether or not they are in serious trouble. The man released David's wrist and took one step back. He looked at me, just briefly, a quick and precise assessment, and then looked back at David with an expression that said everything without saying anything at all. David let go of my arm. Within 30 seconds, 3 hotel staff members appeared from directions I had not noticed and began quietly gathering my spilled belongings from the floor. A woman in a Navy hotel uniform touched my elbow gently and said, "Please come with us, ma'am." Not a question. An escort. I was taken to a private lounge behind the main reception area. It was quiet and warm, with tall windows and a low table already set with hot tea and a small plate of fruit. I sat down slowly, one hand on my belly, trying to process what had just happened. The man came in 2 minutes later. He sat across from me, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, and studied my wrist, already bruising from David's grip, without touching it or making a comment. Then he looked up. "My name is James Kong," he said. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" "I don't think so." My voice came out smaller than I intended. He nodded once. "You are staying in this hotel tonight. A room has been arranged." I opened my mouth to argue. He anticipated it. "It is not a discussion," he said quietly. "It is a safety matter." He stood to leave. Then he paused at the door and looked at the fruit on the table with a pointed glance that somehow managed to feel like a doctor's order. "Eat something," he said. "You need it." He left. The room was completely silent except for the sound of my own unsteady breathing. My phone rang. It was David. His voice, when I answered, was no longer cold. It was shaking. I did not answer. I set the phone face down on the table and sat with both hands wrapped around the warm teacup, staring at the ceiling of a room I had not booked, in a city I barely knew. Trying to understand how the man I had once agreed to marry had just dragged me across a hotel lobby like I was luggage he had decided not to take on the trip, and trying to understand who, exactly, had just stopped him. I called my best friend Nina back in Houston that evening. It was 2 a.m. her time, and she picked up on the second ring because that is the kind of person Nina has always been. "Talk," she said. So I did. I told her everything, not just the lobby, but all of it. Because to understand that morning, you had to understand the 2 years that led to it. I met David Shin during my second year of graduate school in New York. He was completing his MBA. I was finishing a master's degree in public health. He was charming in a way that felt effortless and real, and for a long time I believed that it was. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged. And then I got pregnant, not planned, but not unwanted either. Not by me. Anyway, 3 weeks after we confirmed the pregnancy, David received a phone call from Seoul. His grandfather, the founder of the Shin Hospitality Group, had decided it was time to name a successor to the family business. The condition, delivered through his mother Clara, was simple and brutal: no foreign wife. And specifically, though they dressed it in polite language about cultural alignment, no black wife, David did not fight it. He did not call me. He did not sit across from me and look me in the eye. He sent a text message at 11:47 on a Tuesday night that said the relationship was over and that his lawyer would be in touch regarding financial support. A text message. After 2 years, an engagement ring, and a baby growing inside me, his lawyer did contact me. There was an agreement. He would cover my prenatal insurance, a monthly support payment, and all hospital costs. I signed it. I trusted it because it was documented and witnessed. Then 8 weeks ago, the payments stopped. And 3 days ago, the insurance was canceled. I finished telling Nina everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Maya, Look at the desk in front of you. I frowned. What? Just look. I looked. There was an envelope on the table that had not been there when I sat down. I had not heard anyone enter the room. Inside was a printed insurance document, full prenatal and maternity coverage, already activated, under my name, effective immediately. There was no note. No explanation. Just a lifeline, slipped silently into a room by a man I had known for less than an hour. The next morning, there was a knock at my suite door at 9 o'clock sharp. I opened it expecting housekeeping. Clara Shin stood in the hallway instead. She was dressed in a pale gray suit with gold buttons, hair pulled back, posture perfect. Behind her stood two assistants and a man in a dark jacket carrying a leather folder. A lawyer. She smiled at me. It was the kind of smile that had been practiced so many times it had lost all connection to warmth. They sat in the suite's living area. The lawyer opened the folder and placed a document on the coffee table between us. Clara folded her hands and explained it in the tone a person uses when they are trying to sound generous while doing the opposite. The settlement looked substantial on the surface, but buried in the language, and I had enough legal training from my graduate program to catch it, was a clause that would strip my daughter of any right to Shin family recognition, any inheritance claim, and any formal acknowledgement as David's child. In exchange for financial comfort, I would be signing my daughter's identity away. Clara said, "You are a smart woman, Maya. This is the best outcome for everyone. Comfortable. Clean. Simple." I picked up the document. I read 3 pages carefully while she watched with patient eyes. Then I set it back down. "I didn't come here for money," I said. "I came because my daughter deserves health coverage and a father who shows up." Clara's smile stayed perfectly in place. "Fathers," she said softly, "are chosen, not assigned." She stood and left without another word. My phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. A text message with 4 words, "Do not sign anything." And then a single initial, K. That afternoon, David came to the room. He looked like someone had taken all the polish off him overnight. His tie was slightly crooked. There were shadows under his eyes. He stood in the doorway and really looked at me, at my belly, and for just a moment something crossed his face that looked almost like grief. He sat on the edge of the armchair and clasped his hands together like a man preparing to confess something. Then he told me the settlement was my only option, that I had no official reservation in my name, that Korean courts would not be sympathetic, that birth documentation for my daughter could become complicated. Every word was a wall being built around any exit I might try to take. He stood to leave and said, "You were always too stubborn for your own good, Maya." 20 minutes after he left, a soft knock came at the door. A young woman in a sharp black blazer stood in the hallway. "My name is Sue," she said. "I work for Mr. Kong. He would like to invite you to dinner this evening." She paused. "He said to tell you it is just dinner. No pressure. No agenda." I looked at her for a moment. "What time?" I asked. The rooftop restaurant was closed to everyone else that evening. I only realized this when the elevator opened and the entire space was empty except for one table set near the glass railing, with the lights of Seoul spread out below like a second sky. James Kong was already seated. He stood when I stepped out and waited until I was settled before sitting back down. He did not make small talk. He did not ask how I was feeling or comment on the view. He poured water into my glass and said, "I know why you are here. I know what the Shin family has done with your coverage. I know about the agreement that was signed and what they have violated." I stared at him. "How?" "The Shin Hospitality Group's recent expansion has been financed in significant part through my investment firm," he said simply. "I know their business better than their own accountants." "Then you have leverage over them." "Yes." "And you are using it for me." I studied his face. Why? He was quiet for a few seconds, long enough that I almost withdrew the question. Because I once watched my mother get escorted out of a building by a man who thought his money made him untouchable, he said. And I was 12 years old and I could not do anything about it. He said it without performance. Just fact. We ate. He asked about my daughter, her due date, her health, my health. He listened with the kind of focused attention that is actually rare in people with power, because powerful people are usually only waiting for their turn to speak. By the time dessert came, I understood something. I was not a charity case to this man. I was not a problem he was solving. He was treating me like someone with value in the room. Then Sue appeared at the edge of the rooftop with a tablet. She showed it to James. Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. He turned the tablet toward me. It was a video. The hotel lobby. Me, David's hand around my wrist. Already at 4 million views. By the time I got back to my suite that night, the video had crossed 9 million. People from Korea, the United States, Nigeria, the United Kingdom, Brazil, all watching the same 38 seconds of footage. David's grip. My bag on the floor. Clara watching from behind with that composed, satisfied expression. And the moment James Kang's hand came in and everything stopped. The Shin Hotel Group released a statement 2 hours later. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Their communications team had framed the incident as a private family matter and suggested the footage lacked context. Within 20 minutes of that statement going live, their reservation lines were overwhelmed with cancellations. 2 travel influencers with combined audiences of 8 million publicly canceled their brand partnerships with Shin Properties. Their PR team had poured gasoline on a fire and then complained about the smoke. James sent one instruction through Sue: say nothing publicly. Not yet. Then my phone rang. An unknown number, different from the one that had texted me before. I answered carefully. The voice on the other end was warm. Older. Measured in the way of someone who had learned patience not from personality, but from experience. My name is Helen Kong, the woman said. I am James's mother. I have been following what is happening to you since this morning. A brief pause. I would very much like to meet you tomorrow if you are open to it. I looked at the city outside my window. Yes, I said. I am open to it. Helen Kong arrived the next morning with no assistance and no visible agenda. She was in her early 60s, simply dressed, with short graying hair and calm, intelligent eyes. She brought a small bag of Korean pears from a street market and set them on the table between us like we were old neighbors. She sat across from me and looked at my belly with a soft expression that had nothing performative in it. How are you feeling? She asked. Honestly. Exhausted and scared, I said. But also, strangely, less alone than I was 2 days ago. She nodded like that made complete sense. She told me her story without me asking. 35 years ago, she had been a seamstress's daughter in love with a man from a wealthy family. When that family decided she was not suitable, they did not argue. They simply made it clear in that quiet, civilized way that powerful families have perfected that she was expected to disappear. She was escorted out of a dinner she had been invited to, in front of everyone. She disappeared. She rebuilt. And she raised her son alone, in a 2-room apartment, working 3 jobs, making sure he understood exactly what had been done to her and exactly why it was wrong. James does not tolerate it, she said simply. Not since he was old enough to understand. Then she leaned forward slightly. I know Clara Shin, she said. We ran in the same social circles 30 years ago. Before I was removed from them. A quiet beat. I know something about how the Shin family built their first property. Something Clara has spent 30 years ensuring no one examines too closely. My heart rate picked up. What kind of something? I asked. Helen looked at me with steady, careful eyes. The kind that matters, she said. When the time is right, You will know exactly what to do with it. She left me with the pears and a silence so full it took me an hour to breathe through it. David came back 2 days later. This time without lawyers, without Clara, without the armor. He found me in the hotel's garden courtyard where I had started taking slow morning walks on my doctor's instruction. He sat on the bench beside me without asking and looked straight ahead at the water feature in the center of the garden. He looked hollowed out, like something internal had collapsed and the outside had not fully registered it yet. The video is everywhere, he said. I know. My friends from university called me. 3 of them. People I have known for 8 years. They did not recognize me in that footage. I said nothing. The alumni office sent a formal message, he continued. Still I said nothing. He turned to look at me. Up close, in the morning light, without the Shin family apparatus around him, he looked like the person I had met in New York before the phone call from Seoul changed everything. And that was almost worse than the coldness. Maya, I am sorry. The words came out rough, like they had been sitting in his throat for weeks and had finally worn through. I know you are, I said. I think you have been sorry since the night you sent that text. He looked at the ground. I was not strong enough. Your mother is not who sent that text, I said quietly. You did. He did not argue. We sat in silence for almost a full minute. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Something in his posture changed, subtle but immediate, like a door closing behind his eyes. My mother wants to file a formal complaint, he said. Against Kong. For interfering in a private family matter. Is that what you want? I asked. He did not answer. But I saw it clearly then. David was not afraid of James Kong because of power or reputation alone. He was afraid because James had done in 30 seconds what David had spent 2 years being too afraid to do. He had stood between me and harm without being asked. And that was something David did not know how to face in himself. That evening, Sue came to my room with information James had asked her to share. The Shin family had held an emergency board meeting that afternoon. Clara had led it. Their communications firm had developed 3 parallel narratives to be pushed through media contacts simultaneously. The first suggested the footage had been staged for attention. The second questioned my financial motives. The third, and most vicious, raised public doubt about paternity. I felt physically ill when Sue read that last one to me. They planned to release all 3 at once, she said. The goal is to flood the conversation and create enough doubt to shift public sympathy. Can they do that? I asked. They can try, she said. But Mr. King has been building a counterposition since the morning of the lobby incident. He has documented every financial transaction David made to your account. Every payment that stopped. Every communication. He has the original signed agreement. She paused. He has been preparing this since before dinner on the first evening, she added. I sat with that. This man had sat across from me asking about my daughter's due date while already being 3 moves ahead of the people trying to destroy me. The morning their 3 narratives were released, I woke up to 47 missed notifications. By 7 in the morning Seoul time, several outlets had run the staged video framing. Comment sections were splitting. Doubt was spreading like a slow leak. I called Nina. She read me some of the comments. I listened carefully and then said, I need your help with something. I borrowed Sue's portable ring light. She produced it without blinking, as though she had anticipated this, and I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in natural morning light. No makeup. Hair loose. One hand resting on my belly. I recorded a 4-minute video. I did not perform. I spoke the way I would speak to a doctor, clearly, specifically, without decoration. I explained who I was. I showed the insurance cancellation notice with my name on it. I described, calmly, what a high-risk prenatal patient faces when coverage disappears at 7 months. I talked about my daughter. James had told me through Sue to wait, to let him handle the public response. I posted the video anyway. Then I sat quietly and waited for the knock I knew was coming. It came 12 minutes later. James stepped in, looked at me, looked at my phone on the table, and was silent for a long moment. "I told you to wait," he said. "I know." Another pause. Then, just slightly, his expression shifted. "You were right not to," he said. He sat down. And for the first time since we met, he let out a long, slow breath that sounded like a man setting something heavy down on a table and finally stepping back from it. My video hit 5 million views before noon that day. By evening it had crossed 12 million. The staged footage narrative collapsed almost immediately under the weight of the cancellation document I had shown on screen, a real document with real dates and a real cancellation code that journalists quickly verified as authentic. The paternity insinuation was met with such swift and widespread public disgust that several outlets that had initially published it quietly deleted their posts without comment. 2 Korean public figures with large international followings shared my video with personal statements. A coalition of multicultural family rights groups in Korea issued a formal public letter to the Shin Hotel Group demanding a response. By the following morning, the Shin Hotel Group had lost their major United States partnership deal. Officially. In writing, the American luxury brand cited reputational concerns in their termination notice and chose to release it publicly, which they did not have to do. They chose to. David was photographed outside the Shin corporate offices looking like a man walking toward a verdict. Then Sue called me at 10 that night, her voice carrying a different quality from her usual steady composure, not alarmed, but heightened. "A former Shin hotel employee has contacted your lawyer," she said. I had retained a Korean-American attorney 2 days earlier through a referral from Helen Kang. Her name was Rena Park, and she was precise and relentless in a way that made me feel, for the first time, genuinely protected rather than merely advised. "What did the employee say?" I asked. "She was a senior administrator in their legal department for 6 years, Sue said. She says she witnessed the insurance cancellation order being given directly, not by lawyers acting on their own initiative, but by explicit instruction." A pause. "And she has the email chain to prove it." The next day, I asked James directly about his world. We were in the hotel's private dining room, just the 2 of us and a meal that neither of us was fully focused on, and something about the accumulated weight of the week made the usual careful distance feel unnecessary. "Tell me what you actually are," I said. "Not the press release version." He looked at me for a moment. Then he set his chopsticks down. "My father ran a criminal organization," he said. He used legitimate businesses as cover: construction, logistics, hospitality financing. He was disciplined and ruthless, and he treated my mother like a possession until she was no longer convenient, and then he discarded her. What happened to him? He died when I was 24. A consequence of the life he chose. No emotion in his voice. Just fact. I inherited both the legitimate holdings and the criminal infrastructure. I was 27 when I took full operational control. And the criminal side? I have spent 8 years dismantling it, he said. Methodically. Business by business. Contact by contact. He picked up his glass. I am almost finished. But the reputation remains. Yes. And I use it when I need to. He looked at me steadily. I used it in that lobby. I would use it again. I looked at him across the table, this man who had inherited a monster and spent a decade quietly dismantling it piece by piece. You could have walked away from that lobby, I said. Most people would have. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I could not have. We did not discuss what that meant. But it sat between us for the rest of the evening, warm and unresolved, like an answer to a question neither of us had found the words to ask yet. Helen came back with the full story the following morning. 30 years ago, The Shin family built their first property on land obtained through a fraudulent contract. Documents had been altered. Signatures had been forged on a land transfer agreement that should have gone through a government approval process and did not. Helen had known. She was young, she was afraid, and she said nothing. But she had kept copies. Paper copies. Stored for 30 years with the quiet determination of someone who had always believed, on some level, that they would matter eventually. My lawyer Rena nearly came out of her chair when I called her. The original fraud may be past the statute of limitations, Rena said carefully. But if the Shin family has been filing regulatory documents for 30 years that actively conceal the fraudulent foundation of that original acquisition, then it is not a historical crime, I said. It is a current one. Exactly. A pause. Maya, this changes everything. David came to find me one more time, and this time I could see he had not been sent by anyone. We sat in the courtyard again. Evening. The garden lights were coming on as the sun dropped behind the city. He had his hands clasped between his knees, that posture he defaulted to when he was trying to be honest instead of strategic. He told me something that shifted the picture slightly. The insurance had not been canceled on his mother's direct instruction to him. The Shin family's legal team had escalated it independently, further and faster than Clara had authorized. Even she had not known the full extent of what her own people had done until the video made it impossible to ignore. He was not defending her. He said that clearly. But it mattered. It meant Clara was partly operating in the dark about how far her machinery had gone without her full knowledge. Then he said something I had not expected. His voice dropped and the polish fell away completely, and he sounded, for the first time in a very long time, like the person I had met in a New York coffee shop 3 years ago. I still love you, Maya. He said it looking at the garden, not at me. I know I do not have the right to say that. But I need you to know it is true. I was a coward. I chose wrongly at every point that mattered. But what I felt, that was never a lie. I looked at him for a long time. David, I said quietly, love without the courage to act on it is just a feeling. It does not protect anyone. It did not protect our daughter. I stood up slowly and walked back inside. When I reached the lobby, James was crossing from the far corridor toward the elevators. He had not seen me yet. He paused by the window that faced the courtyard. Through the glass, I could see David still sitting on the bench. James looked at the courtyard for a moment. Then he looked up and found my eyes across the lobby. His face was still, but something in it asked a question he did not say out loud. 2 days later, James requested a private meeting with David. No one else was present. They met in a boardroom at the KJ Capitol building for less than 40 minutes. Sue told me James had brought one folder and said fewer than 400 words total. David came back to the hotel looking like he had been taken apart and reassembled slightly wrong. He went to Clara first. I knew this because Rena called me an hour after the meeting to say that Clara had contacted my lawyer's office requesting an urgent consultation, behavior Rena described, with careful professional restraint, as highly unusual for someone who had been playing offense since the moment I arrived in Seoul. That evening, David knocked on my door. He stood in the hallway with his hands at his sides and said, "He has the land documents." I said nothing. He has already been in contact with the regulatory body. He swallowed. He made one offer. One way out of this. He paused. He said it was not about punishment. What is it about? I asked. David looked at my belly. Our daughter, he said quietly. He had not yet decided whether he would accept the terms. He said he needed to speak to Clara. But the way he said it, the flatness, the exhaustion in every syllable, told me that for the first time since I arrived in Seoul, David Shin had genuinely run out of moves. And some part of him, I think, was relieved. Sue told me the full terms the next morning. James had asked for nothing for himself. Not a share of the Shin portfolio. Not a public statement about KJ Capital's role. Not a business concession of any kind. Every single term was built around one person. The Shin family would formally and legally acknowledge my daughter, not through a quiet side agreement, but through a public legal declaration. Her name would be registered. Her status as David Shin's child would be documented in a way that could not be quietly erased later when the attention faded. David would establish a financial trust, irrevocable, independently administered, covering my daughter's care, education, and financial security across the full span of her childhood. Clara Shin would make a public acknowledgement. Not necessarily a scripted apology, but a clear acknowledgement that the events at the hotel had occurred, that they were wrong, and that the family accepted responsibility for them. In exchange, James would not pursue the regulatory matter. The fraud would not be reported. The Shin family would correct their historical filings quietly enough to clean the books without collapsing a company that employed hundreds of people who had nothing to do with what its founders had done. Sue finished reading and looked up. He asked for nothing for himself? I said. One thing, she said, and the faintest trace of something crossed her expression. He asked that you be present at the signing. He said he wants to see your face when they do it. That night, my body made the decision before I could process any of it. My water broke at 11:47 p.m. 8 weeks early. Everything moved fast, and I remember it in fragments. The call to the front desk. Sue appearing in under 2 minutes, already on her phone. A medical team, James's personal physician, and 2 nurses I had not known were on standby, arriving at the suite door with a transport chair before I had finished my second contraction. I was in the hospital's private wing within 14 minutes. 8 weeks early. That number kept cycling through my mind as they settled me into the room, attached the monitors, and the numbers began climbing and falling on the screens above the bed. James was in the waiting room when I arrived. Still in the jacket he had been wearing at dinner, which meant he had not gone home. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped, watching the surgery wing doors with an expression I had only seen on him once before, in the lobby, in the half-second before he moved. David arrived 23 minutes later. He was breathless. Sue had called him, but James's team had reached him first because James had decided I should not be alone in that waiting room, and David should not arrive to an empty one. They sat on opposite ends of this same row of chairs. They did not speak. For 3 hours and 40 minutes they sat there, in that fluorescent waiting room, with everything unresolved between them and everything that mattered happening behind the closed doors in front of them. Clara arrived at the tower mark and was stopped at the lobby entrance by 2 men she did not know. She did not get past the lobby. At 3:33 in the morning, a nurse came through the double doors, looked across the waiting room, and said, "Miss Johnson is asking for Mr. Kong." The look on David's face is something I will carry for the rest of my life. My daughter was born at 3:51 a.m. on a Wednesday. She was 4 pounds and 11 ounces, and she screamed immediately, which the doctors said was exactly what they needed to hear, and I cried so hard I could not see for 2 full minutes. I named her Zoe. James came in when the nurse brought him through. He held a coffee cup he was not drinking. He looked at Zoe in the clear bassinet beside me with an expression I did not have a word for, something between awe and a fierce, quiet relief. "You can hold her," I said, "if you want." He set the coffee down. The nurse showed him how to support her head. He held my daughter like she was made of something more valuable than everything in his world combined, and I watched this man go very, very still. David was allowed in 15 minutes later. He came alone, no lawyers, no mother, just him in a gray shirt with his jacket over his arm. When the nurse placed Zoe in his arms, he stopped being David Shin, successor to the Shin Hospitality Group, and became something simpler and more real and more broken open than I had seen from him in 2 years. He looked at me over her head. His eyes were wet. "I will sign everything," he said. "Not because of the terms. Not because of any of this." He looked back at Zoe. "Because she deserves it." "Yes," I said. "She does." A request came through the hospital liaison at noon the next day. Clara Shin was asking to see the baby. I said yes. Everyone in that hospital wing was surprised. I think James was the only one who was not. Clara came alone. No assistants, no lawyer, no cream blazer. She was dressed simply, a dark cardigan and trousers, and her hair was slightly less perfect than I had ever seen it. She looked older in that honest light. She looked, for the first time, like a person rather than a position. She stood at the edge of the bassinet for a long time without touching it. She looked at Zoe, at her tiny fists, her dark hair, the determined scrunch of her sleeping face. Then she sat in the chair beside the bed, looked at her own hands, and spoke. She told me that when her husband died, his family removed her from the ancestral home within the week. Because she was not from the right background. Because they had tolerated her while her husband was alive and could not be bothered to continue once he was gone. She had stood in a hallway with a suitcase and watched a door close on everything she thought she had built. "I made David hard," she said, "so that would never happen to him. And I made him into someone who did it to someone else instead." She exhaled slowly. "That is what I will have to live with." It was not an apology, but it was true. And in that room with my daughter sleeping between us, truth felt like more than enough to start with. "She will know your name," I said. "I will not take that from her." Clara looked up at me. Something behind her eyes cracked, very slightly, like a hairline fracture in something that had been sealed for a very long time. She nodded once and did not trust herself to speak. Zoe spent 11 days in the neonatal unit, and every one of those days I sat beside her incubator for as long as the nurses allowed. James came every evening after work. He would sit in the chair on the other side of the unit, not intruding, not performing concern, just present. Sometimes he brought food from outside because hospital meals at midnight were not something anyone should face alone. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat in the quiet hum of machines and watched my daughter breathe. David came every morning. He was consistent in a way I had not seen from him before, not dramatic consistency, not the kind that needed to be noticed or acknowledged. He just showed up. He sat with Zoe. He learned her feeding schedule. He asked the nurses questions and wrote down their answers in his phone. I did not know what had changed inside him in that waiting room at 3 in the morning. But whatever it was, it held through every day that followed. Clara did not return to the hospital after that first visit. But on day 4, she sent something, a small handwritten card addressed to Zoe, with 3 sentences in Korean that Sue translated for me. It was not poetic or elaborate. It said, "You are a Shin. You are welcome. I am sorry I made that complicated." Rena called on day 8 with the schedule for the signing. The Shin family had agreed to all terms. Clara's legal team had negotiated the language of the public acknowledgement for 3 days and had ultimately accepted a version that Rena described, with careful professional restraint, as everything we had asked for worded in their voice, which was fine, because the content was what mattered. The signing was set for 3 days after Zoe's projected discharge from the neonatal unit. James asked through Sue whether I was well enough to attend. "Tell him yes," I said without hesitating. I would not miss it. The signing took place in a conference room at Rena's law office, neutral ground, at my request, and James had agreed without discussion. A long table. Documents arranged in order. David sat across from me with his legal team. Clara sat beside him, back straight, expression composed. Rena sat to my left. James sat 2 seats down from me, and he was still in the way that told me he could have waited all day if the process required it. The process took 45 minutes. Each section was read aloud, explained, and signed. The public acknowledgement. The legal registration of Zoe's full name and parentage. The trust documentation. Independent administrators, irrevocable terms, clearly defined purpose. The formal removal of the clause in the original settlement that would have stripped Zoe of her identity as a Shin. Clara signed her section without drama. She read each paragraph carefully before signing, which meant she was not delegating this to habit or legal instruction. She was choosing it consciously, sentence by sentence, fully aware of what each word cost her and what it gave. When the final page was signed and witnessed, the room was very quiet. I looked across the table at Clara. She met my eyes. There was no warmth between us yet. That would take time if it ever fully came. But there was something, acknowledgement. Two women who had been on opposite sides of something that should never have become a battle, looking at each other across the evidence that it was finished. In the corridor afterward, as everyone gathered coats and files and prepared to step back into their separate lives, James fell into step beside me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Like I can breathe for the first time in 7 months," I said. He nodded. We walked toward the exit together. "So," he said in that even, direct tone of his, "what comes next for you?" I stayed in Seoul for 2 more weeks after the signing. Zoe's pediatrician wanted her monitored before clearing her to fly, and I was not in any rush to argue with medical caution. We had a suite at the Grand Sara, same hotel, entirely different context, and I spent those days in a quiet decompression I had not known I needed until it arrived and settled over me like something warm. David visited twice a week. He and I settled into something that did not have a clean name yet, not friendship exactly, but a functional and honest coexistence that had not existed between us since the early days in New York. We talked about Zoe's schedule, about the visit calendar, about what we both wanted her childhood to look like, and where we agreed, and where we would need to negotiate carefully and with patience. It was not warm between us, but it was real. And for Zoe's sake, real was the only thing that mattered. James and I had dinner 3 more times before I left Seoul. Each time, the conversation went somewhere deeper than the last. He told me about the final phase of dismantling his father's criminal network, 2 remaining holdings, targeted for full legitimate conversion by the end of the year. He talked about it with the exhausted, quiet pride of someone who could finally see the last mile of a very long road. I told him about the emails I had been receiving from women, mostly Black women, navigating foreign family court systems with no roadmap and no one who understood their specific situation. I had started writing back to them. 3 in particular had situations that felt devastatingly familiar. "You have a direction," James said. "I think I do," I said. Houston welcomed me back with July heat and Nina standing at the arrivals gate holding a handmade sign that said Queen in block letters she was absolutely not embarrassed about. I cried when I saw her. I had been holding so much for so long, and Nina's arms were exactly the right place to finally put some of it down. I moved into a new apartment, one with a proper nursery, working air conditioning, and an elevator, which I had listed as non-negotiable after 7 months of navigating stairs while pregnant. The lease for the first year was covered through the trust structure Rena had built. After that, I intended to cover it entirely myself. I registered Zoe with a pediatrician in Houston and sent the full neonatal file from Seoul. The doctor read through it and said, "This child received excellent care." I said she did. I spent the first month home doing 3 things. I slept, which I needed desperately. I healed, which was slower than I wanted and faster than I expected. And I started answering emails. There were 47 of them by the time I properly sat down at my desk with coffee and addressed them one by one. Women who had seen the video or the signing coverage and written to me about their own situations. Different countries, different family structures, different legal systems. But the same core experience repeated with painful consistency, navigating institutions designed by people who assumed you arrived with resources, connections, and belonging that you simply did not have. I called Rena. I called a friend from my public health program who now worked in international family advocacy. I called a lawyer Helen King had connected me with whose practice spanned 4 countries. And then I built something. Small at first, just a resource directory, a clear intake process, a network of attorneys across 6 countries willing to offer initial consultations at reduced cost. But it grew quickly because the need had always been enormous and had simply been waiting for someone to organize it into something people could access. 6 months after I left Seoul, the organization had helped 43 women across 9 countries navigate situations that had seemed, to each of them, completely without a pathway forward. I named the organization after my daughter, not as a monument to what happened, just because Zoe was the reason I had been in that lobby. And that lobby was where everything changed. David called every Sunday morning. Not always for long, sometimes just 15 minutes while Zoe was in her bouncer, and he could hear her sounds through the phone, and I could watch him watching the screen with an expression that looked like a man learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to show up for something he had once walked away from. It was not a redemption arc with a clean ending. Real life does not produce those. It was a process. Gradual. Sometimes frustrating. But consistent in a way that mattered more than grand gestures. Clara sent a package for Zoe's 3-month milestone. Inside was a small silver bracelet with Zoe's name engraved on it in both English and Korean, and a note in Clara's handwriting that said simply, "For when she is old enough to wear it." I put it in the box I was building for Zoe, the one with the documents and the photographs and the things I wanted her to understand, one day, about where she came from and what it cost and what it was worth. James and I spoke on the phone every few days. Sometimes about the organization, he had quietly connected me with 2 foundation contacts who had both made significant opening grants without my having to ask. Sometimes about his work, the last 2 criminal holdings were being converted on schedule, and he described the progress with the same meticulous calm he brought to everything. Sometimes we just talked. About nothing that mattered strategically. About books and food and the specific exhaustion of caring deeply about things in a world that frequently does not make that easy. One evening, about 5 months after I came home, he said, "I have been thinking about coming to Houston." I said, "Have you?" "There are 2 foundation meetings there in February," he said. "Legitimate reasons." "Of course," I said. "But that is not the main reason," he said. In that direct, undecorated way of his that I had stopped finding startling and started finding something else entirely. "I know," I said. A pause. "Then, I will let you know the dates." "Please do," I said. And I sat after the call ended with my hand resting on the sleeping warmth of my daughter beside me and something quiet and real settling in my chest that I had not felt in a very long time. On a Tuesday morning in February, 7 months after I came home, there was a knock at my apartment door. Zoe was on my hip, wide awake and frowning at the world with the focused intensity she had carried into it from her very first breath and had not relaxed since. I was in socks and an old university hoodie with oatmeal on the sleeve from breakfast, which I had not yet addressed. I opened the door. James Kong stood on my porch with a carry-on bag and the slightly jet-lagged look of someone who had been on a plane for 11 hours and had not slept in any meaningful sense. He was in jeans. I had genuinely never seen him in jeans and a dark pullover, and he looked more like a person and less like a presence than he ever had in the Grand Sora Hotel in Seoul. He looked at Zoe first. She looked back at him with deep, serious suspicion, the way she looked at anyone new, and then she reached out one small hand and patted his cheek firmly, which was what she did to people she had decided were acceptable. Which, as far as Zoe was concerned, settled the question entirely. Then he looked at me. "You said to ask you after," he said. "After the signing. After you were home. After you knew who you were when you were not in the middle of a crisis." "I remember saying that," I said. 7 months felt like after. I looked at him standing on my porch in February light with his carry-on bag and his jet lag and his complete, unperformed certainty. This man who had stepped into a hotel lobby for a stranger because he genuinely could not do otherwise. Who had built a legal case while asking me about my daughter's due date. Who had sat in a hospital waiting room in a dinner jacket through a 3-hour surgery without anyone asking him to be there. Who had constructed terms that protected my daughter completely and asked for absolutely nothing in return except to witness the moment they were signed. Who had flown 11 hours to stand on my porch and ask me to coffee. "It is after," I said. Zoe patted his cheek a second time, more firmly, to confirm her position on the matter. He accepted this with complete seriousness, which told me everything I needed to know about how he would approach the next part of things. "Come in," I said. "I will make coffee." He stepped through the door. And that is the end of the part of this story that needed to be survived. The rest, the part that came after the lobby, after the lawyers and the signing, and the 11-day vigil beside a small incubator in a Seoul hospital, the rest is quieter. Less dramatic. Slower to unfold. Built on honest ground, between people who know exactly what the other is capable of because they saw it clearly when it mattered most. I am Maya Johnson. I flew to Seoul 7 months pregnant with $400 and a canceled insurance card. I came home with my daughter. I came home with her future protected. I came home with a purpose I had not expected and a knock on my door from a man who had every resource in the world available to him and chose, on a cold February morning, to stand on a wooden porch in Houston with a carry-on bag. If anyone has ever told you that a woman in crisis has no power, I need you to hear this clearly. She is all of it. The power was never gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to become undeniable. Zoe is 9 months old now. She has her father's jaw and my eyes and an opinion about everything. She is loud and determined, and she reaches for what she wants without hesitating, and I intend to make sure she never unlearns that. The organization carries her name, and it carries forward. 43 women have come through it, and more arrive every week. Rena sits on the advisory board. Helen King made the first major personal donation, which she announced to me over the phone like she was reporting the weather. 2 foundation grants have allowed us to expand into a 3rd country. David sends a voice note every Sunday. He is building something smaller and more honest than the Shin Empire in a city where no one knows his family name particularly well. He and Zoe have a video call every Thursday. He does not miss it. Clara's bracelet is in the box, waiting for the right time. And James has a meeting with 2 foundations in Houston next month. After the meetings, on a Saturday, we are taking Zoe to the botanical garden because she has recently discovered grass with the kind of intense personal interest that suggests it may be the most important thing she has encountered so far. It is not a dramatic plan. It is not a rescue or a declaration. It is just a morning in a garden with a baby who pats the cheeks of people she has decided to trust. But after everything, the lobby, the dragging, the canceled insurance, the documents, the signing, the 11 days beside an incubator, the 47 emails, the organization with my daughter's name on the door, after all of it. A morning like that is exactly enough. And that is my story. Every word of it. If it moved you, if it stayed with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you love, please do one thing before you leave. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. I pour everything into every story I bring to this community, and your subscription is what makes it possible to keep going. Drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one, and I genuinely love knowing who is on this journey with me. Whether you are in Lagos or London, Atlanta or Seoul, Toronto or Nairobi, let me know you are here. Share this story if it belongs in someone else's hands. Because sometimes the right story finds the right person at exactly the right moment. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That is not a small thing. That means everything. I will see you in the next one.